Okay. All right, I think we'll get started with the introductions. Professor Anderson will be back with us in just a moment to get started. And then people who come in will just be able to come in and get going. So welcome to Dessert and a Movie again. I think we have a really special guest with us and a special evening for tonight. But first, as always, I need to do my thank yous. Obviously, I want to thank Capital Federal for our funding and also to the Sharon and David Katzman Fund for their funding. And that's what kind of keeps us going. And I also want to thank you guys for joining us this evening, as always, which kind of keeps the program cooking. I think most people know, but for those who don't, we are going to take all of our questions at this point on chat. And the professor is done teaching online much more than I've done Zooms. So he should be able to handle that, but I'll just also help take a look at that and make sure we get questions asked. If you do have a follow-up question as he's answering it, please feel free to unchat and we'll try to say at the end of whatever he's finished, do you have more to add, or did I not answer that or whatever? And you can jump in verbally and do that. But other than that, I'd appreciate it if you keep muted so we don't get background noise. This is being recorded, as you guys know, and it's in speaker view. So if you are talking, that's what's going to show on the screen. Just to make sure everybody's aware of that. So I think that's it. Without further ado, our guest this evening is Dr. Eric Anderson, citizen of Potawatomi Nation. He's on the history faculty on the Department of Indigenous and American Indian Studies at Haskell Indian Nations University, and also teaches media study on Indigenous films there. So we had kind of tried to get together at an early time, but didn't work out. So I really appreciate the fact that he's stayed in touch and is able to do this for this evening. And I will introduce him by asking my one and only question, I think, which is why he picked this particular film for us to view. And I will turn it over to Dr. Anderson.
Thank you, Jack. Hope everybody can hear me all right. Good evening. Thank you all for joining. I'm hoping we can have a good visit tonight. I don't want to throw a monkey wrench in anything you said, but I am used to doing very conversational kinds of class meetings and discussions. So I want to be really informal, of course, but please, feel free. If it's better for you to raise your hand, I'll watch for that. And if you need to verbalize the question, that's perfectly fine with me. Just as long as you remember to mute yourself after you're done so we don't get that background noise. But again, thanks so much for inviting me. And I don't have a formal lecture or presentation to make. I was hoping we could just talk about your impressions of the movie. It's a short one, but I think there's a lot going on in there. I'm guessing you all formulated some opinions based on what you saw. So let me circle back to your question, and I'll do my professorial thing in that I probably will give you the multiple layers of answers to it. So for one, when we first talked about doing this, and I recognized that you're using the Canopy platform through the library to utilize film, and we do that at Haskell as well. It's a really great service that it offers. There are some limitations to the number of Indigenous inflected films that you can find there, although I think they do add them as they're able. But I was delighted to see that this film was one that we did have available. And I really think it's a worthwhile movie for several reasons. I know it's not the happiest subject matter. I recognize that right off the bat. But I think it does a couple at least, and maybe a few different things that are worth mentioning. One of them that's most important to me is that it is set in a contemporary um, environment. So we're seeing at least some reflection of native life that is not 100 years ago or 200 years ago or something like that. As Jack indicated, I teach an American Indian film class at Haskell. It's actually one of my favorite classes to teach. And as you probably are aware, there are many, many, many films that deal with American Indian, Alaska Native people. By and large, though, they are set in some time in the past, either the way, way past, or a lot of them in the 19th century, particularly geared toward the Indian Wars period. And as you probably are also aware, and I am painfully aware, a lot of what we see in those representations is inaccurate. There's a lot of stereotyping. And so I think this film in some ways breaks through stereotype, at least in as much as it's showing Native people in a contemporary light. And I like that about it. We could argue, I think, and probably we can discuss this, that it also engenders some stereotypes of its own. But that's one reason that I wanted to choose it as something that looks at issues that are contemporary, that are modern, and that give us the reality that Native people exist today. Because I think that that's a big stereotype that's out there, is that all the Indians have gone away. And so we get a picture of reservation life, depressing as it may be in this particular film. And I think that's important, the contemporary aspect. I've got to say, on a personal note, I'm a big fan of the director. Chloe Zhao, this is her first feature-length film that came out in 2015. She did a follow-up film a couple of years later called The Rider, and I would highly recommend that film to you. It's also set in contemporary reservation life, although I think it in many ways has a happier message. And then, of course, in 2020, she came out with Nomadland, which garnered her all of these accolades and awards, including Best Picture and Best Director. Only the second woman to ever win Best Director and first woman of color. So those would be kind of my big reasons for selecting it. And I think it does a good job with what kinds of issues it touches on. And I'm interested to know the impressions that you all have of it. It's a short film. I realize there are parts of it that are difficult to watch, but I think it sheds some light on particularly life on Pine Ridge Reservation, which probably most of you have at least heard of. One of the poorest places in the United States. It doesn't even probably rise to the level of a developing country by most of our standards. And so we have then in our midst a kind of a constant reminder of the legacies of colonization and native newcomer relations and kind of where they've left a once very proud people in a place where there are a lot of challenges emotionally, spiritually, environmentally, etc. I've had a lot of students from Pine Ridge or thereabouts, and I think that this film for them in some ways rings true. And I know a lot of them like it. I think it also has some really great native themes in it. If you can kind of break past the negative aspects that are in many of the scenes, with the poverty and the alcohol abuse and the damage that it's done. Certainly that's a major theme. And some of the other sorrow that the movie uh, brings up or entails. I think there are some really important and positive aspects in there as well, although you have to look a little harder for them, maybe.
I'll interrupt just a second before somebody else. Oh, I'm sorry. Mary did ask something, and I think that's more important than what I'm going to ask. I saw the theme of fire was both positive and negative, she said.
Yeah, I definitely agree that that's one of those recurring images of fire. Um, I think that's a really interesting observation. It comes to mind immediately, the fire that destroyed the home of the father of so many of these young people in the film. He had 25 children or something by 9 different women, with limited levels of success, I guess I would say, in terms of his relationship with them. Fire, of course, in the destruction of Johnny's um, truck that he worked so hard to come by. Yeah, I'm interested though that to know where did you see the positive in that imagery of fire, Mary?
Well, I'm mostly thinking of I think it was a dream sequence and they
Mhm.
showed the prairie fire
Yeah.
burning and that was sort of the renewal and their tie to the land, I guess.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, I like that a lot. That's a great insight. Uh, Native people used to do controlled burns of their prairie grasses to renew them. And I think fire, of course, is a central aspect of community, certainly in traditional times. So I like that. That's great.
I was going to mention, and it's kind of the same thing, the negative and the positive. I left the film pretty depressed because
Mhm.
his coming home is like there's no escape.
Yeah.
But then, it's when my wife and I call it a refrigerator movie, you kind of have to put it up in the refrigerator and think about it a little.
Mhm.
And about an hour later, I realized, but on the other hand, they didn't get together, but his girlfriend did leave.
Yes.
And it, then I've started seeing the whole movie kind of in a little bit different light. Yes,
Mhm.
she's the exception. And he may be the rule, but it wasn't all one direction.
Yeah, that's true too, Jack. I think that's reflective of the experience of maybe not just Pine Ridge, but many reservation communities. Not all of them. I want to be clear to say, experience the same level of poverty or misery that was highlighted here. But many of them face similar challenges. Um, I think it is true, though, that the jettisoning or the moving on from home, which home is hard to leave wherever you are, even if it's a wonderful place, um, or even if it's not a wonderful place. Um, Getting an education that is embodied in the character of his girlfriend. Yeah, she is able to move on. And that is, I think, a difficult thing for many young Native people, to leave home, and to feel like maybe they are abandoning those they leave behind. But I know from my experience at Haskell, that students are, they often come not knowing what to expect. Many of them are first generation college students still. Um, but I think they're very committed and really proud to be taking that step. And oftentimes, it didn't show it so much in the movie, but oftentimes, if you kind of play that out, they have an idea that they would like to take that education and whatever success that they can gain by it, however you measure success, and bring that back home to try and better their own communities. So yeah, I like that the refrigerator movie. I kind of have to let it, you kind of have to cool off from it a little bit, or you kind of have to set it aside for a minute and think about it. And then I also would suggest that his younger sister's character certainly is one that that gives us some hope for things changing in that seventh generation that that they mention, that the artist she kind of becomes the assistant for, mentions Crazy Horse's vision. So yeah, there's another, I think, duality, an example of both positive and negative.
More questions? If you want to unmute, go ahead. We don't have as big a group as I thought we had, so if somebody wants to unmute, please do so.
Yeah, absolutely.
I wondered if that Crazy Horse vision in the seventh generation was true or was just made up for the movie.
I think that idea of the seven generations is very prevalent across Indian country. I don't know that you know, there's a lot of mythos, let's say, surrounding Crazy Horse. He's certainly a heroic figure to the Lakota, and visionary in some ways. But I think that idea of looking, you know, those generations to the future for renewal or for kind of a new beginning is a prevalent idea that has taken root. One of the things that I experienced at Haskell that is unique about Haskell is it brings so many different tribal people, so many different nations together. And in that, we recognize the distinctions and the differences that we have culturally, as well as some similarity of value systems that we can point to generally. But I think that native experience writ large has glommed onto that idea of a seventh generation, wherever it may have originated. So I don't think it was made up for the film, but there may be a particularly Lakota way of seeing that through the person or the mystique of a figure like Crazy Horse. And I've heard a lot of different interpretations about the seven generations. I think maybe as from one point of view, maybe from a more Western point of view, where we tend to think in a linear fashion or chronologically moving forward, that the seven generations would be, you know, if a generation's 20 years, then it'd be 140 years past the time of, you know, the 1890s when Crazy Horse died, which we're approaching. But I've also heard what I would consider quite native interpretations of that, in that the seven generation idea is something that can be held in each generation, meaning you have a connection to the generations that precede you, so that in your parents to your grandparents and your great grandparents, you know, would be three looking back, and then the one that you are in, your own generation, and then looking forward to your children, their children, and their children's children. So that could be an alternate way of thinking about the connection of seven generations.
Yeah, I also would be interested in hearing about the family connection, because, you know, the general concept, right or wrong, I don't know about native peoples, is if the importance of family, and yet almost every film I see, the families are so broken.
Yeah.
In so many ways. And, you know, is one or the other the stereotype? What is the, you know, what is the reality there?
Yeah, you know, and there's a different story for every person and every community, but we just got done in I'm teaching a class on American Indians in Kansas this semester, which is another one I very much enjoy doing. And they just wrote a paper over a book. It's a novel. It's an old novel, but one that I think is really important and revealing. That, in my interpretation, it looks at education and how community forms the mechanisms for how we learn and understand. And in a book like that, and elsewhere, but just using that as an example, I think you really see the fundamental nature of the importance of family, because in a traditional tribal setting, individuality is not the priority. It's the living for the group. And so a sense of family then exceeds what we might think of as just a nuclear family. It's very extended. And those kinship networks are formalized, I guess you could say, in a way that goes beyond how Western people might think of it, even as extended family, so that the whole community is family, and that an elder, whether they're directly related to you or not, depending on their age, if it's an older man, would be referred to as uncle or grandfather, depending on the age, even if it's not literally an uncle or grandfather. The clan networks are, I think, social modalities that allow for the taking care of one another in very closely knit kind of social networks. And that book I'm referring to has a lot of examples of other kinds of social mechanisms that reinforce community over individuals, that therefore are meant to cohere or hold together the group. And I think that's vital to a tribal lifestyle where you have to depend on everybody else. Survival depends on limitation of conflict. So when the waves of colonization begin to happen and expansion into new places by new people and disruptions that come in the wake of that, whether it be very early on, things like disease that decimate communities, or the introduction of new goods, or new ways of thinking. And of course, when we get to some place like the beginning of places like Haskell with the boarding schools, those are either de facto or de jure kinds of forces that pull apart that fabric, because they are either unwittingly destroying some of that cohesiveness, or they are very much clearly geared towards doing that in terms of their goals, because the boarding schools, for instance, are aimed at destroying native cultures and replacing them with Western or outside values. And so, yeah, that's a long roundabout way of getting to your question, I know, but I think family is fundamental, and that is a large version of what family can be. But I think with the intrusion of a lot of different things, and alcohol is one of them that's central in this film, that serves to undermine a lot of those facets of the closeness of community. So I think that becomes then highlighted in a film like this. And it's an accurate reflection in some ways, because Pine Ridge, for example, has struggled mightily with the alcohol problem. It's a problem in many Native communities, but I would submit it's a problem in all communities. And there are many Native people who, even though there are high rates of alcoholism or substance abuse, given the low numbers of Native people generally, There are also American Indian people happen to also embody or evidence the largest group of people who have never drank at all or taken drugs at all. So I think, yeah, there's both of those things. We probably, maybe it's in our nature. I don't know. Maybe if you're just a very positive person, you see more positive than negative in the film. But I think the needle tends to tilt towards some of those negative aspects or challenges. And that can be, what do I want to say? More than a misrepresentation, that can be a poor reflection of the truth. But at the same time, looking at Pine Ridge, and I think there's been a lot of fascination with that place. It's probably the reservation that most people know the name of more than others. That's a particularly acute problem there, not just for those kinds of challenges that have occurred across Indian country that might lead to coping mechanisms like substance abuse, but in particular, one thing it's trying to show you in that film is the little border town of White Clay, Nebraska, where it's a town of about 10 or 12 people, and something like 40 million cans of beer were sold in 4 liquor stores over the period of about 100 years. And that's what you see, the protests along the road in the film, where they're trying to discourage people, sometimes, physically discourage them by seizing beer. That's where our main character is going to buy the beer that he's bootlegging then to the reservation. And White Clay has consistently been a thorn in the side of Pine Ridge, because it's just a few miles away, and you can't sell alcohol on Pine Ridge Reservation. That was originally a legal restriction. It is now a choice of the tribal nation not to do that. White Clay is no longer in business, and I'm happy to report that they've done some positive things in that town to try and.
We do have another question, but that Dee has. But before we do that, Sharon brought up a point. What was the name of the book that you were referring to that your class had, and author, so that we can take a note?
Yeah, I figured someone would ask. So this is a book called When Buffalo Ran. And it just like the film, it's a little bit complicated, and I'll explain why. It's a beautiful book, I think. It's very short. It's very easy to read. It is deceptively simple in its approach, because I think, just like many Native traditional stories, it's short, but it's got a lot packed into it. So those things land on the very positive side, and I've utilized this book many times in different classes. I really like it. The author is George Bird Grinnell, and Grinnell is not Native. Grinnell was a white guy who came to be very enamored of Native people. He was trained, I guess you could say, as an ethnologist, or what we'd call an anthropologist today. Really, he was a conservationist. He was a wildlife enthusiast, particularly with the buffalo. And that led him through many different adventures in his life, including accompanying the Custer expedition in 1874 into the Black Hills, which presaged the Battle of Little Bighorn a couple years later. He became very close with the Cheyenne people and Pawnees, and also the Blackfeet. And he spent a lot of time with them, and he recorded a lot of their traditional stories, their value systems. And so you have this complicated picture where it's a white guy writing about Native people, which we've seen time and time again. But I think that he did it in a way that was really powerful and insightful in a way that others did not. He certainly, in this book and other places, strove to really humanize Indians at a time when the majority of white people did not see them that way. The bird in his name comes from what the Cheyennes called him in their language, which is Wickus, who happens to be the main character of our book, When Buffalo Ran. And that was given to him affectionately by them because he would come and in the spring and stay with the tribe and listen and learn from them. And he eventually became adopted by the Cheyenne people. And then he would fly away when the cold came to go back to New York. And he was also one of the founders of Field and Stream magazine. Guy led a very interesting life. But I think it's a beautiful little book that does some real service to Native people in the time that he was writing about them, which is over 100 years ago. So
There's two comments, Doctor, that I'll read together and then you can comment.
Sure.
Dee said, I think there is something to be said for the brother staying and making a better decision to
Yeah.
work on cars instead of dealing in alcohol. Maybe when his sister gets a little older, they can both make decisions for their lives
Mhm.
to impact their families positively. And Kay said, I agree with Dee.
Yeah.
There was some positive energy in his decision. He had perseverance.
Yeah, I think those are really true and powerful insights. You know, we don't know what's going to happen after the film concludes, but there seems to be some good indication that his decision to stay and not leave his sister behind was a positive one, even though it meant he was going to have to continue to struggle. Obviously, he was out of business with the truck being burned, but I think he was also trying to make family connections stronger, not only to his sister, but also to, I believe that the young man who kind of offered him the job there at the body shop or whatever it was one of his half siblings from the father. And so, you know, maybe he was trying to foster stronger family connections in that way too. Obviously, his own family had a lot of brokenness. You know, his mother was alcoholic and certainly depressed, and you know, his father wasn't really in the picture, and his brother was in prison. So, yeah, I think that you're right. That he found a way to persevere in this environment, in this situation, even with all of its challenges. Yeah, I like it.
Suzanne, go ahead.
Could I ask a question about how do you see another contemporary director, Sherman Alexie, the difference between the North, the South, and also there are some films about urban Indians. They say,
Yes.
don't forget, we're
Yeah.
also an urban people. I wonder if you could just speak.
Yeah, sure. Well, Alexei is certainly written widely, you know, kind of based in his own Coeur d'Alene culture, and his connections or disconnections with that. Several of his novels have been turned into films. Of course, Smoke Signals and The Business of Fancy Dancing, and those are varying degrees successful movies. I would say Smoke Signals broke a lot of ground. I think you're right to point out those cultural distinctions, because if anything, films about American Indians have tended to either create or certainly reinforce the stereotype that all Indians are the same, Plains Indians, and that's certainly not the case. You know, we have just about you know, as many differences in tribes as there are regions or as there are environments. So that's very true. And also the urban Indian comment is well placed. Today, more Indians live in urban places than on reservations. So the experience of the reservation, while it still is strong and people have roots in those communities, is becoming more and more one of, you know, the urban environment. I think back to other American Indian films, going back as early as 1961's The Exiles, that looks at where mostly San Carlos Apache Indians. It's really a documentary format. It's not a true documentary, but how they are reacting to being in an urban environment as a function of the United States government's relocation policies in the 1950s and 60s. And then, kind of running a line through that, both in literature, maybe something more recent, Tommy Orange's book, They're There, which probably will be turned into a movie, I'm guessing. And others like Skins, which is set on a reservation environment initially, but does have connections to the cities. And so I think that's a really good point as well, that we need to look at that kind of whole picture.
And speaking of the whole picture, I don't want to interrupt, but
No.
I've seen that a wonderful film that Canadians, one specifically dealing with the problem with women, but
Oh yeah.
borders are blurred. My understanding when I worked at Haskell, that borders between Canada, maybe between Mexico, it's not as clean cut, and so you have family elsewhere,
Yeah.
and those issues bleed down
Yeah.
into other areas.
Absolutely right.
I'm going to jump in just for a second because Suzanne had a question and I don't want to lose her. If
Okay.
you go ahead and unmute, please. Go ahead.
Are we on mute?
Yeah,
Hi, thank you so much for doing this.
Sure.
I have some personal issues. Our son-in-law is native from a tribe here in Kansas.
Mhm.
He does not want our grandson to have anything to do with the reservation because of the alcohol and drugs. And I am 97% Irish. I know about alcoholism. Uncles, cousins, a sister, my father. Alcoholism is so difficult. It is a legacy that you just don't want. And I worry because I believe that Natives need to come together to make any kind of government change because of all that, how we dismiss these people. My grandson, how will he ever know to be Native if he doesn't have association? And I think it's just amazing that the kids that you guys have at Haskell have been able to work their way through a lot of this stuff and decide to be students.
Yeah, well, you got a lot of different really important issues at work in your comments there. Certainly, Natives are not alone in their struggles with alcohol. Maybe those have been magnified through things like film. They do exist, obviously. But I think, by and large, is less of a focus on the positives of community, and what can happen when people come together. I think it's going to be difficult for all Natives to come together, because there are a lot of divisions that still exist. I'd like to see that. I do see it at Haskell, and that gives me hope. But I think you're also really onto something there about, even if there are challenges in those communities, reservation, urban, or whatever, part of what's been assaulted for so long is the very identity and cultures of Native folks. So I think they need to have that connection. And it's everyone's personal choice, however they want to raise their children, of course. But I think that having those connections to the positive possibilities and experiences is really vital. And even at Haskell, we are not without our challenges, and things are brought from home that are both positive and negative. But I think we're really trying to focus on or enhance those positive experiences. And as I alluded to earlier, one of the things that's really, really cool and unique is seeing, representatives of 140 different tribal nations all together at a school that's only, less than 1,000 students. And you talk about diversity, that's just incredible, right? So, yeah, I think those are really, really heartfelt and well-placed points.
There's a couple comments that are specifically about the acting in the film. Dee said, I noticed in the credits that there was
Mhm.
praise given to the director for being able to bring out deep emotions in actors who are non-professional actors.
Yeah.
And Kay mentioned that she agreed that the acting was top notch. So a little back to the film again.
Yeah,
interesting comments.
it is to some degree, cinema verite. These folks who are in those roles, I think, are pretty intimately familiar with the places and the people and the things that are being represented in the film. They're not professional actors. These are folks that the director went to scout the area and met and found that these people are going to be able to tell the story way better than someone who's brought in from outside. And I think that is important. And I think the acting was really great. And it was really from the heart because of that. Again, that the Hollywood Indian has been so overly stereotyped that this, I do believe, is a positive aspect of the film. Even though it's dealing with really difficult subject matter. We get a glimpse at that through the eyes of the people who really have experienced those things, whether directly or indirectly. And I might add, she did very much the same thing with the writer, her follow-up film, which I, again, can't give enough praise for. It's just people from that community. And, she had a little bit more money than she did with this film. And so, you've got that as well. And I mean that in that, it's a little bit more polished, but not in a way that's more hyped or something, but that I think allows that story to be told with maybe a little bit more depth. And that one's about a native guy who's if you haven't seen it, who's a rodeo guy, and rodeo is very big in Indian country.
Could you give us the name of one question was, could you give us the name of the director again?
Yeah, it's Chloe Zhao. Last name is Zhao.
Okay, I'm sorry. I'm sorry to have interrupted. I just.
No, you're good. I will put it in the chat so that everybody has it.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay, great. Okay, are there any other questions? I know I kind of interrupted Sharon and I didn't mean to do that. If you had a follow-up, you okay?
You're muted.
Okay.
I just, to Suzanne, to be deprived of heritage is a very difficult thing in parenthood and in life because it rebounds almost invariably. And the child, when kept from that history, and sometimes it's extremely painful, as we've seen with important persons who didn't know they were X, Y, or Z, and only find it out later in life, whether it's being a Jew, whether it's being adopted, so forth. There are ways perhaps to address it sideways. There are some wonderful books I've read that are children's books. Again, seeing Indians being joyful or happy. I mentioned the powwows and some of the festivals. It is not, in my opinion, a successful ploy because the child will always have questions. Daddy, where did you come from and how? And they pick up the negative very, very easily. And so perhaps it's the wonders of grandparents who can instill joy.
Yeah.
And
I will mention that this group, it's been a little over a year. We have visited and had a tour of the Haskell Cultural Center,
Oh, good.
which was phenomenal.
Yeah.
But in that time, we have about 600 new members. So I think I'm going to make an effort to reschedule that
Yeah.
later in spring or summer and see. I'm not sure who's still there that I need to contact, but I'm sure Eric can tell me.
One of my former students is now the director. We have a permanent director finally. His
Oh,
name is
good.
Travis Campbell. I just put that in there. And yeah, he's got big, great plans and visions for the future. And some of those are already in
I
motion.
think Travis gave us the tour, but he wasn't
Right.
permanent then.
Yes,
And
that would be
he
right.
was excellent. So I'll get an email out to him
Mhm.
and we'll see if we can do that and whatever. I'm sorry, it's
Yeah,
a little bit of an aside, but it made me think about it and it was kind of a reminder to myself
Yeah.
that that's something that we need to do.
Yeah. and
Okay,
there's a
back
connection.
to,
Also, there's Dan Wildcat and some others are doing a thing, I think it's in April, where they're doing something out by the medicine wheel. That has to do with nature and so forth. So I think there's maybe a lot of opportunities for
Yeah.
Yeah.
People
Yeah.
to, experience the native
Um,
culture and the native.
Dr. Anderson and
birthday celebration out there.
Dr. Anderson and I were talking before everybody came on about 3 or 4 year pre-COVID, when Dr. Wildcat was temporarily the head of the school as they were searching. He had an open house, day at the U, they called it, and it was wonderful. You had some short 15-minute classes. The first time we didn't meet, but I got to see Dr. Anderson. He mentioned that they may be trying to do that again, hopefully this summer, spring or summer, if possible. So that's a wonderful opportunity to do something as well.
Yes. And, don't forget, Haskell is such a part of Lawrence and we haven't always, had the best relationship with the community throughout our history. But the Haskell is your tax dollars at work. It's government land. It's open to you. So please, avail yourself of any and all opportunities. We have public events all the time, not always as big as the Day at the U, but I'm hopeful we will have another one of those. And of course, we have our powwows and the big art market, and I'm hoping we'll do more and more of that with a stable, young, new president at the helm. I think you're going to see more and more of those opportunities.
Are there other questions or comments about the movie? One of the things, I'm
say-
sorry, go ahead, please, Kay.
I just wanted to say that I know that it was showing, struggles and negative aspects that some of the natives have, especially on the reservations. But I think that people need to know that. It's sort of like, having films about the African Americans that we wish we didn't have to see, but we
Right.
need to see those.
Yeah.
Because people need to realize what the situation is, because it's not fair that they're living like that, and it's basically because of them wanting to just get rid of all the indigenous people. And I think it's good for people to know that this is still needs to be realized, and hopefully there's some ways we can help correct some of these things.
I agree with you. I always have said that. I've been at Haskell for a long time now, 16 years, but I've taught at a number of places during my career, and my background, my doctorate's in history. I always say that to students, these are difficult things to confront, but if we don't confront them, we're not going to get past them. We're not going to be able to heal. I mean, and that's hard, but life isn't always easy.
one other question I have is really more political than about film, but when we did make our other tour and I was chatting with Travis, he mentioned that the last time that Haskell was fully funded was under Nixon.
Mm.
And regardless of administration, the BIA and the BIE just seemed to be ignored. And I mean, I guess I could ask why. I don't know that anybody can answer that other than it's not important enough. But
Yeah.
it comes up.
So remember that I am a government employee
I know that.
and that I am being recorded.
That's true. Okay.
But
Yeah,
I will.
we'll pass on that. I apologize.
No. I'll answer. I'll give you just a very brief answer as an historian of American life and culture and politics. Yeah, I think that's right. You know, just look at that long history. I mean, where were American Indians housed in terms of their relationship with the government prior to being in Interior, you know, Department of War? So I think it just gives some indication of, you know, the way the political winds have blown. Sometimes they change more than others. We are in the 100th anniversary of the American Indian Citizenship Act, which has some very positive aspects to it, because it at least took Native people out of being, you know, completely wards of the United States government. We did see a lot of, you know, positive action in different times and administrations, and I think looking across the Haskell campus, it's very easy, at least for me, to see in things like the architecture, the different periods of and administrations that are reflected in the way that the campus looks. You know, government funding is what government funding is, but I would agree with you. I think that oftentimes, as is true with other minority groups, you know, funding has not always been the priority we might like it to be. How about
So
that for a politic answer?
That's a good answer, and I think it tells us where we are. And I apologize for putting you on the spot.
Yeah, the BIAK has not been a friend to the Indians all the time. There has been enormous corruption, not only within there, but the government.
Yeah.
And I don't want to get into any of that hot water, but just being there for a bit on the foundation, it was appalling. There are hierarchies in any society and co-option, and it's pretty icky.
There is also, if anyone is interested, one other question is, are there other films more up to date, because Canopy is limited in a time frame, usually financially, that you might be able to list? And you don't have to list them here. You might mention some if you'd like, but if not, if you could send me a list of films, I could pass it on to those who attended and they might be interested in seeing some of those. We would really appreciate that as well, Dr. Anderson.
Sure. I would be happy to do that. And I can even, if you like, send you the syllabus for my class so that you can have
terrific
an overview. We deal with the contemporary films at the latter part of the semester. You know, of course, we're limited in any class with what you can do. I once started to try and make a list of every film that I could think of, or that I knew of, or that I owned that deal with American Indians, and it's just like, you know, it starts to pile up pretty quickly. American Indians are, as I also tell my students, you know, you are probably the most written about and filmed about group of people of any group of people there are. And a lot of it they got wrong. So I appreciated this film for what it does get right, even though we could argue that sometimes it maybe focuses on the negative, to the exclusion of some of the more apparently positive themes that I'm so happy you all were able to draw out.
Okay, any other comments, questions, general feeling about the movie? Was it on a scale of 5? How did you rate the movie? 3.
Roger Ebert says.
We have a 4. We have a 4. I think parts of it was, for me, were at times so depressing, it makes it hard for me to love the movie. Parts of it were very hopeful, and that broke it through. So I would probably give it a 4 as well, but it was pretty heartbreaking.
Yeah, I agree with that. I probably give it a strong 6.
Yeah,
But you can ask my students. I'm a bit of a softie.
yeah. Okay, well, I really appreciate somebody said, please recommend an upbeat movie.
Okay, yeah,
Um,
I'll do that. I'll send along some things to Jack. I was limited with what I could do on Canopy.
Yeah,
You did
no, I
get
gave
to
him,
learn about Wilma
unfortunately-
Mankiller, I understood, and
Yeah, I
that's
mean,
a
I'm not
fairly
sure I want to
positive.
recommend Killers of the Flower Moon because that's not positive either.
Yeah,
Um,
for a variety of
but
reasons,
it's-
I wouldn't recommend it, but that's
Yeah,
just my opinion.
wonderful movie that one was as well. And for
you say
those of
so.
you who have not been there, I would recommend the museum, the National Museum of American Indians in Washington, D.C. If you're ever there and get a chance.
Yeah.
It's a wonderful museum. Not much, but many of the items there were contributed by Haskell, and that helped them open it because of what they had collected in their cultural center. And it's up there, so there's a bit of a relationship there. And they also have one of the best restaurants in any museum I've ever eaten at as well. I'll throw that in. So I want to thank Dr. Harrison for joining us tonight. I hope all of you found it interesting. Big round of applause. And maybe next movie, and I hope to have him back. We'll come up with one of those positive movies about Native Indigenous people, and we'll go from there.
That sounds good.
Thank you all for joining us
you.
tonight once again. Hope to see you at another Deserted a Movie or another thing. And I completely slipped mentioning the dessert part of it, which is pretty much relates to the time period. But I'm sitting here enjoying a delicious cornmeal or Indian pudding, which I made this afternoon. That is fantastic. I finally found the recipe I like. This is great. Sorry, I can't share it on Zoom. So,
Dr. Anderson, I'm fascinated by your facial expressions when they mentioned the flower, moon, and I'm going to be seeing the picture this week. Please tell me what I should be aware of, because I need you to help me.
I will say this, because I don't want to give any misconceptions and certainly no spoilers. It's a story that needs to be told. It's certainly an overlooked period of American history, and a tragic story among many of those in American Indian history. It has some very strong acting. It is very long, so be prepared for that. But no, I want you to formulate your own opinions. Sometimes perhaps I give too much away in my facial expressions.
I know, it was wonderful.
But yeah, it's hard for me to say enjoy because it's difficult subject matter, but
Right.
yeah, I hope that you will find it enlightening. And as I say, I do think if you haven't seen it, certainly the story it tells is one that is hard to believe we, as we went through our public school education, never knew about until 100 years later. So
But it is true and factual, right? It's true to the history.
yeah, I mean, certainly it's based on real events and real people. Yes.
I thought there were some Native Americans that did not like the way the film was done and felt like the natives were not portrayed very well.
Yeah, I think there are gonna be some differences of opinion there, for sure.
Okay.
Well, thank
All
you all
right.
so much. I really enjoyed it. I hope
We'll
maybe I
have to-
can
yeah,
join
we'll
you
have to leave
again
it there.
sometime for a
Thank you.
positive movie.
Okay, we'll do that next. All right,
Okay.
thanks so much, folks.
Yeah.
Have a
you all have a great
wonderful
night.
evening, and we'll see you at the next retroactive event.
Thank you.
Good
Thanks,
night.
everyone.